The cloud. Thank you. Okay. So with that, I want to invite you to take a moment to just arrive in your seat, or also arrive standing, to take a moment to breathe, to stretch, and to rest on this earth, to feel your body on the big earth body. And if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes. If you would like to keep them open, I invite you to just sort of soften your gaze and not look at the screen, or just look anywhere else in the room. Send a couple of breaths through your body, starting from the very base, breathing all the way up through your spine and out through your mouth. And let your awareness wander around in your body. Just sensing without any judgment what feels present. Where there are areas of movement or of stillness, of tightness. And when you discover these areas that might be a little bit in a discomfort or some sort of a stretchness or tightness, just sense that and send a caring breath that direction. And now I really want you to try to notice all of the areas where you have a sense of ease. To put your intention and your attention to those areas that might not make themselves noticed in a very loud way. Maybe to sense all of the areas where things simply are working. Where the cells are collaborating to help you move, to create warmth, to digest. And maybe also sense where there is well-being, where there is comfort, where there is pleasure. Breathe here for a moment in gratitude. And now maybe you can pull up from your memory the ways in which your body is able to feel pleasure, to feel well-being inside. Like when you get to rest after a long day, or when you take your first bite when you're really hungry. And all the ways in which your heart can feel tenderness or joy or relief. And breathe here for a moment in gratitude. And then we can recall all of the different ways in which we can experience joy and pleasure on the outside of us, like the sound of leaves crunching beneath our feet, or the smell of coffee, or somebody telling you how they appreciate you, the quality of the light, a hug that lasts longer than you thought you needed it. And breathe here for a moment in gratitude. all of the goodness that this life brings is for you. And with 3 more deep breaths, I invite you to come back to the space that we shared today. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. So I think we're going to pause recording and just turn to Kenny just to do some great. So I'll just be recording me. So let's just take a moment to taste all those different flavors of goodness. Is that good? Just, you know, whether it's food, friends, warmth, inspiration, connections, you know, finding goodness in many different places, unexpected things on the pavement. Yeah, just how many beautiful tastes and experiences life offers us. And this in itself, isn't it, is one of our practices of health, is to savor. I used to teach sometimes with mindfulness teachers, and they used to use this word savor, to savor the good. So we're just giving ourselves a moment of tasting each other's different flavors of goodness and joy. So thank you all for sharing one of your little flavors. And I love how sometimes what's lifting us up is, you know, the company of others, and sometimes what's lifting us up is solitude, isn't it? And, you know, sometimes we want excitement and sometimes we want rest and quiet, and how that's another taste of what gives us health, is the movement between different flavors, and how when they're in balance and flowing, they can all taste good. And the very first week we did that practice, you know, when we just have one and it goes on and on, when we're with people or busy, it starts to fade, and then actually it starts to become harmful. Whereas if it flows into rest and quiet and solitude or something else, or rich food and then a break, and, you know, then we can go on finding the health and the taste in all the different flavors of life. And those of us that do grief tending, which there's a few of us on this call, you know, even that flow between joy and beauty and strength and vulnerability and sadness and loss and letting go has its own rhythm and its own beauty and its own sort of flavor of health and richness of life. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen in a moment, and, you know, some of you will know that once upon a time I was an engineer and I really like maps. I haven't got the whole of healthy human culture down into equations yet, but perhaps one day. But I like this idea, you know, that, you know, an engineer, what was it that an engineer wants, you know, is to kind of look at a system and ask, what is it about that system that determines how it behaves? You know, why does wood have strength in a certain way? Why does it bend like that? Why does it split? What is it about the essential nature of wood or concrete or water flowing through a pipe? You know, and engineers like to write it all down in maths. But that was my first training, and that's kind of shaped my way of looking at the world. I can still see the residue. And this whole series of talks and this whole body of work that I call Healthy Human Culture really is asking the question, what do we need to understand about how human beings work, not just on our own, but in systems, in groups, in across scale, in the context of the living world and of our ancestors, and of how we want to pass life on to the future. Like, in this enormous complexity, are there some things we can understand about what it is to be human that help us to design for health? And I guess part of the reason why that's been my life's inquiry is seeing, you know, from things in my family, but also to the kind of most appallingly abusive organizations that were idealistic feminist collectives in the 1980s, which other people may have experienced or not, you know, how people really setting out to do good can end up creating systems that are really harmful. painful, but even, yeah, actually harming the ones in it. So this has been my question, and I'm going to share today. It's a bit of a mappy day, but we've also got some, yeah, we're going to do some bits of inquiry. So I'm going to have a go at sharing my screen. Let me just see if I can do that. And for those that haven't been before, I'm just going to offer a recap. For those of you that have, I hope it's not too boring to look at some bits of the map again. So healthy human culture, how to create it, why we often don't. And, oh, sorry, this is not the truth is one of my most favorite sayings. So here's healthy human culture, and this idea, you know, this proposition that healthy human culture involves the flow and balance between different states. I'm really curious whether we can say that's to do with our nervous systems. But if we see it as archetypes, you know, that how they show up in cultural patterns, we might say there's one archetype that could be rest or love, yin, water, the archetype of dependence, of needing each other, and a kind of an archetype that's not an opposite, but that's a sort of contrasting archetype that might be action, will, or strength, yang, fire, autonomy. And this idea that in many different cultures, traditions, health is actually defined as the balance and flow, or the relationship between these archetypes. So I got really interested in that and curious, do these archetypes relate to the parasympathetic nervous system that organizes us for mobilization and action and outward, and the parasympathetic that brings us back into ourselves, but also to the heart of the community, to relating, to softness, to receiving. So part of what happens, we have this ground state, very relaxed action, relaxed rest, back into relationship. We get a bit of stress. We go into negotiation. A lot of our stress as social beings is peer-to-peer stress. It's, you know, guarding our belonging in the group. And these little purple arrows are the return paths. So last week we were really focusing on the nature of return paths. I'm going to make this as another proposition, which I'm totally open to you improving on. 5 conditions for this ground state and this kind of basic place where humans in healthy cultures live is that we feel connected, safe, we feel empowered, valued, and resourced. Some people have said it's a bit similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think it's really important to dismantle the hierarchy. I refuse to put them in a hierarchy. We need a matrix where these are all met at the same time to be in a state of well-being. So increasing stress, we get our emergency responses, fight, flight, and then freeze. Again, I've sort of shaped them according to the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And in healthy culture, we have these return paths. So that might be a ceremony, a ritual. It might be something we do every week, like a grief ceremony. It might be something that's called in after something very shocking or dramatic or violent has happened. It could be a sweat lodge. And in modern day, you know, that might be a workshop. It might be, you know, the Summer of Soul group music festival where there's lots of love and dancing and shakeout, and maybe there's some sacredness as well. And it might be a walk in the wood, and it might be, you know, something very simple. But especially important is the return path where we've got all the way to freeze. So, you know, Peter Levine's work about how once animals get to that freeze state, they tremor, they shake out. And then this, this insight that if we have those return paths, actually stress in the system carries on growing our resilience. You know, we get wiser, we get more deeply connected, we get more confident. We know that we can deal with life and what life brings us together. And then this is the basic proposition about unhealthy culture. So we have all of this going on, but what happens when the return path fails? And week 2 was really looking at this bit of the map. which I would say is exactly what trauma is. So there's a shocking, an overwhelming, a terrifying event, and the failure of the return path. And now we move into this new sort of landscape. So now there's a residual amount of flight, fight, freeze. This state of fawning, of placating comes in. And over on the right-hand side, we explore quite a lot of that again in week 2. What does traumatized culture look like? These ones on the top right tend to run the system. So the system is run by people in manic action. I think I've put them up here. People avoiding difficulty, avoiding facing into things that are challenging because we don't have the resources to deal with them, but also patterns of domination, bullying, violence, colonization. And then, you know, the others in the system will be required to appease, you know, a distortion of love might be codependence. And here is also burnout, collapse, you know, the end of growth, but now a system that's completely exhausted. So this is my sort of map of human culture. And in this week, we're going to be slightly simplifying that and especially exploring a kind of more of an overview. What helps us to stay over here? What takes us away? And what brings us back? And how can we design systems that keep us on the left-hand side as much as possible? So that's where we're going. And we're going to have a look at, yeah, this 4x4. I think it's quite funny to call it a 4x4 when those are cars that we want to have less of in the world, but hopefully it's a useful map. And we've got a lovely intervention of healthy human culture bingo at the end that Sarah's going to bring for us. So that's where we're going. And we're going to start just by a little exploration of this map. So this 4 quadrants map, many of you may know it already. I came across it from Ken Wilber. Other people have used it before him, and it's in many other places. And I just think it's a really helpful map about inclusivity. So one of the things that I think can happen is that we look through one of the quadrants, and then it's like the quadrants that we don't include are the ones that will bite you in the bum, as my northern friends might say. You know, so if we're not thinking about all 4 quadrants, we can miss out part of the system that will then sabotage the rest. So here are the quadrants, if you haven't met them before. Left-hand side is about inner consciousness, thoughts, feelings, history, memory, dreams, aspiration, beliefs, worldview. And on the right is the outer world, everything we can see and measure and touch, you know, and get a scientific instrument to measure for us. Left and right. Top and bottom is I, so just a first person singular, one person, individual, and at the bottom is we, and we could see that as a increasing scale. So we, you and me, this group, organization, family, society, plus ancestors, plus beyond human, and so on. So this map is a test of are we including everything? And I just want to name that often people describe what they call whole systems, and actually they're just in the bottom right quadrant. So the start of transition was, you know, in order to deal with peak oil and climate change, we need to redesign our energy, housing and food systems. It's all lower right quadrant. You know, other people brought inner personal, outer personal, outer collective. Well, actually, what's the worldview from which this system originates? So we're just going to do a tiny inquiry into that today. And so here are the 4 quadrants: I, inner, beliefs, thoughts, dreams. We, inner. What are our collective beliefs, you know, as a group? What are the collective beliefs of my culture, of my organization? I, outer, is personal behavior. What can you see me doing? But also my body, my physical health. And the we, outer, you know, what are our physical systems for living and our actual actions in the world. So we're just going to do a little inquiry. If you're really familiar with this, I hope it's not too boring. Let's stop screen sharing. So can I just have a little check? Who's familiar with 4 quadrants as a way of thinking about the world? Is that some of us? A few. Okay, so I hope this is going to be helpful, because for me it is a really useful bit of systems thinking. Yeah, some of us. So thanks for people that are asking questions and answering in the chat. That's really great. Yeah, let's just do a little inquiry, and the inquiry is going to be to explore health in 4 quadrants. Okay, so the invitation is to take something about yourself that you appreciate, that you like. Just find my instructions. And to see if you can trace back with your partner, we're going to do this in pairs. Where did that grow in you? How did you come to develop that quality? So as you trace it back, you might see that it came from something in your family, maybe a belief, but also maybe behavior that was encouraged, something to do with school, culture. And your partner's going to help you to notice, oh, now we're on the inner personal, so a belief about myself. Now we're in outer personal. How do you behave? How do you act? Oh, now you're in the sort of inner collective of your family, you know, the value systems, what was given appreciation in your family. So just to notice one characteristic of a system, you, and see if you can find it and trace it in all 4 quadrants. And your last question, you're going to have just 4 minutes, so just, you know, see where you get to and then swap. It's going to be, can you see that quality represented out in the world? So my characteristic might be that I'm articulate, you know, I'm quite good at explaining things. We did a lot of talking in my family, a lot of very heady discussions, you know, it was really encouraged. I can see it. So there it is in both the behavior, and my parents valued that. So it was there in the collective inner, in the belief system. Where do I see that expressed in the wider world? You know, there's whole industries devoted to expression, to clarification, philosophy, to thinking about thinking, to, you know, language and expression. So, you know, I can find it in all the different quadrants. Anyone got any questions? Is that clear enough? So you're going to, one person's going to choose a quality and explore it for 4 minutes, supported by the other person. And then you're going to just, we'll give you a message, and then you're going to swap over and the other person will do the same thing. Yes, Sarah.
Could you just put the 4 quadrant map back up just so that people could note down which is which?
Yeah.
And
great.
Sophie, just a clarification, how are we choosing a quality to explore?
Something that you like about yourself.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Something that, you know, that feels like a health in you, an aspect of your health. Let me do that. Okay, I'll put this back up so you can see it. There we go. So I inner, my beliefs, my inner world, I outer, we inner, we outer. Okay, so Kenny, have you got breakout rooms set up? If there's anything you're not clear about, you're welcome to just stay and ask a question before you go. Was that another question? Okay, so Kenny, if you want to open the rooms, that'd be great. So have a good exploration. Shall we pause recording? So it's one of the things that one of my kind of elders in the transition movement spoke about a lot. A woman called Hilary Prentice talked about parallel process, and she talked about how what was going on, you know, within the heart and soul group of Transition Town Totnes, or within the transition movement, was some sort of parallel to what was going on out there. And this idea that what's going on in the different quadrants somehow can teach you about, you know, the system across scale, I just find really, really useful. So this is one way of starting to explore that and get a feel for working with systems, you know, truly as whole systems engineers, you know, whole systems facilitators. And I just want to say, you know, why is that 4-quadrant map helpful? So like I said at the beginning, often people see the world through one quadrant. So psychotherapists will interpret everything that somebody does as to do with personal, psychological pathology or health. You know, engineers and scientists interpret the whole world through outer collective. You know, if we can't measure it, it has no meaning. And, you know, the worst of that polarity is to deny that the other quadrants exist at all. So, you know, the sort of deep spiritual kind of position might be external material reality has no meaning. It doesn't exist. You know, and the scientific reductionism is consciousness is just a byproduct of our brains. But actually, none of those help us to work with the whole of human experience. So there's something about this map that starts to put together one of the places where we really split. And one of the things Hilary said is in the West, we made a very deliberate split when Galileo and all of that stuff was happening between the church and science, where scientists and the church said, we will not cross onto your territory. So we built that split into different systems of thinking and different areas of human life in a way that would be unthinkable for most indigenous cultures. You know, the idea that your science and your spirituality are not to speak to each other would be completely insane for a lot of culture. Okay, so I can't stop talking about all of this stuff, but I'm going to go on and share a bit more. So I'm going to carry on screen sharing, if that's okay. So yeah, this is where we were. So 4 quadrants is really helpful, and I was teaching something during the transition movement, and I realized that 4 quadrants wasn't enough of a map to think about how the system that I was dealing with worked. So this is what I realized, is that I needed to talk about 2 kinds of 4-quadrant systems. So there must be healthy 4-quadrant systems where human beings have lived in ways and could live and still do live in ways that are more peaceful, more joyful, more connected, more attached, more sustainable, more in harmony with the rest of life. And there are ways which are more unsustainable, more violent, more disconnected, more traumatized. You know, is that true? We could spend a whole, you know, session, a whole lifetime arguing about that, but that's my proposition, is that that is true. So in transition, we wanted more of this on the left, more health, and less of this on the right. And then I realized that even these 2 4-quadrant systems weren't enough, that we needed to have change systems as well. And that actually the most helpful was to think of change also as 4-quadrant systems. And then to see that there are dynamics that bring us back to health. So this might be at the eye inner, you know, a trauma therapy. And the collective, the outer collective might be landscape restoration, or changing our food systems from one involving masses of oil and petrochemicals and fertilizer to one that's more in harmony with life. So, you know, we can find change systems taking us back to health across all quadrants. And we can also find places where something that is healthy is damaged or destroyed, whether that is, you know, abuse, attack, violence, war, but also globalization, you know, industrializing our farming culture, or changing from renewables to fossil fuels, or whatever it is. So I just, for me, this system, this 4-quadrant, 4x4 quadrant, feels like a map that is good enough to be able to, let me just get rid of this breakup, to be able to speak about what's going on in the system. So this is my whole systems approach. Let's work. So yeah, so there's a set of insights that come from that, and I'm just going to go through them. The first insight from this map is we need to know what health is. Does that make sense? We need to know what are the qualities and how can we tell when we're there. We had a big conversation at the beginning of transition about ways of knowing, and the word discernment came up. You know, we need to be able to discern when we're in the healthy version of scientific method and when we're in the unhealthy version. When we're in the healthy version of our feelings and when we're in the unhealthy version. But whatever part of the system we're in, we need to be able to discern health. And very often when organizations come together, they define their objectives in terms of their doing, in terms of their outer, but they don't define their objectives in terms of their culture. Does that feel true? So often we say, you know, we're here to make this or do this or carry this out, but we don't say, and the way we're going to do it is, you know, we're going to have a balance of being and doing. We're going to have action and rest. We're going to check that we're all, you know, feeling a deep level of trust and commitments or something like that. So that's one of the insights that I think this map really helps to clarify. What is health in all 4 quadrants? And then we might also ask, yeah, what is unhealth? So the second insight, oh, sorry, these are coming in. I've forgotten I put these in. So this is, again, the sort of proposition from that other map, that health is something to do with creating these 5 conditions and creating a place where we're generally in a relaxed state of balance and flow between action and rest, or love and will, whatever pair we choose. So second insight, all systems have all parts. So whatever system it is has got all of these things going on, whether that's an individual, so I'm a system, whether that's an organization, whether that's a society. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, I can do and I hear other people doing is, you know, to say, like Dita's example might be, you know, oh, the police force, they're all like this. They're all in part of a system of harm because there is institutionalized racism, you know, because there are dysfunctional dynamics. But then we deny that the part of the system that is also healthy, isn't it? So there's something about putting back into every system. There is both goodness and there is harm, and there are dynamics going in both directions in every system. And again, the question that I think is more helpful is not, is this system healthy or not? You know, can we locate it on either side? But to ask, how is this system healthy or not? You know, what are the characteristics of health and harm? And how is this system culturally organizing itself to create more health or to create more harm? So insight number 3, this is getting a bit more engineering-y. Change outweighs the fixed state over time. So the example that I often talk about, you know, I saw transition groups that started off with a tremendous amount of skill, of resource, of energy, you know, lots of people involved. And because they didn't really pay attention to certain aspects of how they worked as a group or their culture or something else, over time, they created what I would describe as a burnout culture. And they gradually got more and more and more exhausted. And, you know, I came across some of them that said, we were so tired, we just had to stop. We didn't have any energy. And for a year, we did nothing. And then after a year, we'd picked up our energy again. They'd managed to come back over here. And then they were really paying attention to the health of the group in a different way. And similarly, there might be a group that starts off with very little energy and very little resource, but actually if they design their culture well, you know, over time, they will come to be a group with a lot of health, a lot of skill, you know, and a lot of possibility. So, you know, representing that, if we have dynamics, a lot of dynamics that are taking us away from health and not enough bringing us back, you know, will end up going in this direction, and similarly, you know, in the other way. So the question, if we're designing group culture, if we're designing, you know, a system, is how can we make sure that this part that's creating more and more health is, you know, as strong as possible, but is at least stronger than the dynamics that may be taking us away from health, so that over time health can improve. And, you know, that's lots of aspects of health, isn't it? Might be these aspects. Okay, so that's insight number 3. 4 is about feedback. And again, you know, the engineer loves this diagram. Because an engineer would never design a system without feedback. You know, you'd never design a machine that could go completely out of control without noticing that it was going out of control. And yet that's actually what we've designed, isn't it? You know, our economic system of endless growth is a system that's basically completely taking us out of control, and to a state of enormous harm. I mean, I say we, you know, who is that? Who did that? So feedback. So I invite you to just take a moment to reflect on, you know, what is needed for feedback. You know, if you imagine, say, this transition group that was starting with all of its energy and vitality and all the rest of it, you know, what did it need to do maybe before it got to a year later and it was completely exhausted? What might have happened on that journey that would have prevented the full journey all the way to exhaustion? What might that group have done? So just we're not going to take responses, but just inviting you to notice, and maybe also to reflect on where you've seen that happen in a group. You know, where has a group noticed that something is going wrong and done something about it, and what were the steps of that process? So what does a feedback loop actually look like? So we're just going to pause a moment, and yeah, we might also just take a little breath because there's a lot in here. Which might also be a little intervention of feedback, and the need for breathing and pausing. And I'm just going to make, again, a proposition. This is what I think a feedback loop might consist of. So it's all going to come in one. The first thing is we need to stop. So there needs to be a pause. So if we're constantly in the doing, we probably won't notice. We notice, we make meaning of anything that we're noticing. So, you know, we notice that we're getting more irritable, that we're getting more tired, that our meetings feel more stressful. And then we design an intervention. So, you know, maybe people are leaving the group. It's like, well, what does that mean? And what do we need to do so that that doesn't continue? And then whatever our intervention is, we implement it. And then we just keep going around this loop, stopping noticing. What are the signals now? So designing this in, and again, you know, often these are designed in around doing. How are we getting on with our schedule, with our timetable, with, you know, the task that we're doing? But this is also about inner. Yeah, one of my greatest achievements, I think, in the second meeting of Transition Town Totnes, Hilary and I from the Heart and Soul group did a burnout check. So while Transition Town Totnes was in the full-on, super excited launch stage where there was masses of energy, we asked everybody who was leading a group how sustainable they were. And we realized, everyone said, I can't last more than 6 months. So we made a strategic decision to get some more paid support so that we would stay over where we were in health. And I think it's one of the most wise sort of interventions that I've ever made, because we also then did all kinds of things, seeing the risk of that excitement, to put in structures of support as part of the Transition Town Totnes project. So feedback is vital. And here's another one: signals of harm escalate if they're unattended, you know, which is probably a good thing. So, you know, we can go from being irritable to having rows to going to war with people. isn't it? And I've seen that in groups as well, that when we don't pay attention to the small signals, they get bigger. And it might be conflict, but it might be burnout, it might be stagnation, you know, and it might be sickness or death, you know, if we don't find a way back to health. And I'm going to make this proposition, you know, something that might be really obvious. Pain is the most important signal for human beings. Why is that? Because we're designed to feel pain when something is wrong, when there's unhealth in the systems that we're part of. You know, if there's a physical problem, we'll feel it as a physical symptom. You know, if we're out of right relationship with someone, we may feel it as tension or guilt or anger or resentment or upset or insecurity or fear. You know, and all of these systems interact. We may even just feel it as a physical symptom. You know, we may notice we're getting headaches. And it's because there's some relationship that's not working or something in the group's not right. So our body is designed to attune to health. Our body, feelings, mind is designed to attune to health and to give us a signal when we're moving away from health. And we need to notice the signals. So this is one of my favorite insights that came from this model, which is that, you know, here's a great big feedback loop. We've got all the way, we're really feeling the harm. So we've responded, but it's come quite late. You know, here would be an early response. We've picked it up earlier. So the feedback and the intervention can be smaller. Here's a really little one. And actually, this is the sort of proposition of this insight, is that, you know, the pattern of repair and intervention, if we make those smaller and smaller, actually we can weave them into our daily habits and that will strengthen health. Does that make sense? So, you know, one of the examples that I sometimes speak about from transition, you know, was a meeting where somebody who was part of the council came in and said, nothing that you ever do is ever going to make any difference. He was, you know, a bridge between transition and the local council, because the council will stop transition from ever doing anything significant. You know, he'd been in some terrible, depressing meeting. And it put a kind of fear wave into the whole meeting, and knocked us out. If I had been able to really catch it, I'd have said, well, what we need to do now is to think of all the things we've done already. It took us to a place of disempowerment, of you know, whatever we do isn't going to make any difference. And we could have just caught it and gone, let's remember all the things that we do that have made a difference. And actually thinking about it even more, we could have built that into our meeting practices, you know, that at the start of each meeting, we say, let's celebrate all the things that we've done to make a difference since we last met. And then we would have woven that sense of we are making a difference, empowerment, or, you know, value, whatever characteristic we want to say. We've woven that into the fabric of our culture. And, you know, there's some very obvious examples that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Gratitude is one, appreciation is another, celebration. You know, that if we weave these in, we're building those 5 qualities all the time. These 5 qualities, yeah. So that's kind of all I'm going to share in this. Here's a summary of the insights. We need to define what health is so we can navigate our way around the map. All systems have all parts of the map. Over time, the change dynamics outweigh the fixed state. So paying attention to what creates change is really important. Early feedback is essential, especially listening to pain. You know, an extension of that is the people who feel the most pain are often the ones that are marginalized. You know, so that brings us back to that insight of centering the marginalized voices. And then health is the pattern of restoring health made tiny. So I'm really happy to share this presentation, so you don't need to write all of that down. There'll be an email that will come to everybody that's been signed up for these sessions. If you haven't signed up, make sure that you email me at healthyhumanculture@gmail.com, so you're included in that. And we're just going to have a little bit of time now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. We're just going to have a little bit of time to digest that, and we'll go to a little break first. So we might just have like a 5-minute comfort break, if that's okay. And before you go, we just want to give you a few instructions. So one is that when we come back, we're going to invite you to choose one area of this map to have a bit of a conversation around. If you want to look at a detailed bit of the map, you can go into a smaller group. There'll be a space in the main room to just explore the whole thing or ask questions. But if you want to have more of a detailed conversation, can we just post in the chat what those 3 conversations are going to be, just to let people know? Teresa, could you do that? And then the second thing is you need to bring a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen for the bingo that's going to come at the end. So whatever happens, we are going to do bingo, because that is the healthiest bit of today's session. So, Teresa, can you find those things? If not, I can have a look. Brilliant. And we could maybe stop recording as well, if somebody can do that. Thanks, Teresa. I just wanted to say something to what you said, Vicky, as well. You know, there's something about that moment when a lot of founders leave, that often that's a make or break moment for organizations, and often the mission has to change. You know, there's something about founders and a particular kind of dedication, which often means, Hazel, overriding their self-care strategies, isn't it? They're the ones that go, this thing needs doing, I'm going to do it, I'll do it, I'll do it. They've got so much of that energy, and often the second generation don't have the same amount. You know, I'm not saying this is always true, but sometimes there needs to be a scaling back or a shift in direction, and for that not to be seen as a loss, but to be seen as an evolutionary stage. You know, the next phase of the organization's life may look really different, but actually that's not a failure. So there's something about that I think is interesting. It's a really interesting stage, and it has sort of pain and chaos and disturbance in it. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking because now we're going to play bingo. So Sarah, are you ready? I want to just say, you know, if we're not answering your questions and you don't have time to stay on, next week is much more of an overview. We haven't planned the program yet. If there are questions you particularly want us to address, feel free to email me. I'll leave my email before the end. So, you know, hold on to your questions because I'm sure they're rich and interesting. But let's play bingo because it's fab. So Sarah, can I just hand over to you?
Thanks. Just in case you were getting despondent and despairing in this call, we just thought we'd bring you a little bit of healthy human culture bingo, just to help you reconnect with your own personal feedback loop of joy and health in your life. You will need a piece of paper marked out like this. 1 to 16 in a square like this. I am going to pull numbers out of a hat like this. Cross the number off if it feels true for you. And each number is a reminder of just some of the ways we can find more personal health and joy. And the first person to cross off 4 in a row, horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, please unmute and shout bingo. We ready to begin? Got a sheet like this? Great. Number 2, vegetable stew. I've cooked food for friends in the last month. Number 2. That's true for you. Cross it off. Number 16, a new deal that's green. I've had a positive impact on something or someone. If that's true for you in the last month, cross off number 16.
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Number 16, a new deal that's green. I've had a positive impact on something or someone in the last month. Number 6, teen kicks. I've sung for pleasure. I've sung for pleasure in the last month.
What was the number?
Number 6. Number 5, bebop and jive. I've discovered some incredible new music. Number 5, I've discovered some incredible new music in the last month. Number 12, react, don't shelve. I've expressed anger calmly and assertively. I've expressed anger calmly and assertively. Number 12.
Ever or in the last month?
In the last month. Number 13, feel I've been seen. I've asked for support from someone in the last month. Number 13. Remember, we're waiting for the first person to get 4 in a row. Number 14, emotional teen. I've cried tears of sadness and been held. Number 14, emotional teen. I've been held with tears of sadness in the last month. Number 4, potentially raw. I've expressed something vulnerable in the last month. Number 4. Number 15, ditched my screen. I've taken a digital holiday in the last month. Number 15, that one. Number 8, blissful state. I've had some fantastic sensual pleasure with my body and or another's. Number 8, blissful state.
Go.
And you know, thank you, Teresa. So one thing that we looked at was 4 quadrants. You know, how do we think about systems not just as outer or inner health, but actually all of that. And I saw somebody putting in the chat, you know, if we're blurring between inner and outer, maybe that's a good thing. You know, isn't it? If you really inquire into them, they all dissolve. Of course, there's no real separation between inner and outer, which is why this thing of, you know, it's to do with how we look. It's not to do with what we see. Does that make sense? That's why it's helpful, because our looking splits us. And when we see the split, it helps us put it back together. You know, one of the things that I've found as somebody who brings a lot of inner to groups is that sometimes a cognitive map really helps the people that don't get it through their feelings. you know, actually engaging people with their mind into the reasons why it's a good idea to do a check-in, because here's a map of the path to burnout, and here's an intervention that brings us back. And burnout occurs in 30% of people in transition will burn out. You know, with some research, actually that makes sense to somebody where speaking about care maybe doesn't. So yeah, there's been something helpful about being an engineer and a therapist all in one body. So I mentioned these 5 principles, or maybe 6 principles. You know, we need to know what health is. We need to think about the dynamics of change. We need to include feedback loops. We need to listen to pain. And that stuff about why pain, it's to do with trauma. In a healthy system, we might be much more focused on health. Making the feedback loops really small, weaving the feedback loops in so that they're actually just a part of every day. You know, what if we put celebration at the beginning of our agenda? What if we put appreciation in the middle of our meetings? You know, what if we build these things into the structures? What if we have, you know, a party at the end of each project or something? How can we design rhythms to embed that idea of flow between work and rest, between action and joy, you know, whatever it is. Great. Next week is going to be a different kind of a session, and next week is going to be, it's called Gathering the Threads or Weaving the Threads, and it's really about putting the whole map together. So there's going to be an overview of all of the different maps and seeing, you know, of course, really there's just one map looked at through slightly different lenses, but there's going to be an opportunity. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do, but probably there'll be some open space. So if there's a question that you want to explore in more detail, you'll have the chance to bring your own topic. And the last bit of next week is going to be exploring, you know, does anybody want to do a longer journey with this work? So some of the people that are here, Teresa, Kenny, Sarah and Dieter, have all been part of a 6-week ongoing group that we ran, that was alternating between some teaching, some conceptual week, and then 2 weeks later we'd have a practice week where we just bring, how are we applying this? You know, what situations am I dealing with that I want some help with? And for me, I learned a huge amount. You know, next week maybe some of the people that were part of that could say a bit about their experience. But actually the only way to really have this be useful is to apply it, and then to find out what doesn't make sense when you try to bring it into your group. And for me, this question, how do we get groups and organizations to work, is just so fundamental to these times, isn't it, at every level of scale. So this one doesn't burn out, you know, so this group has a joyful journey, like you said, Hazel, embedding the values. I think she's gone, you know, but embedding our values in the way we work. So yeah, that's my sort of sense of mission. Great. It would be lovely just to end with a word, you know, or a phrase, anything that you're taking from today. So anything that I've missed that I need to, yeah, should we just do that? So maybe we pass around, but yeah, your last sentence, your last whatever, if we can start.